Okay, I know that when we get to like less familiar units, it's going to be, do I divide, do I multiply? And that's the mistake we make. That's where this unit analysis helps, is do I multiply or divide? If you want to know whether to multiply or divide here, first of all, I guess if you have yards, you're going to have a bigger number, right? So you're going to think you multiply. If you put miles on the bottom, because that's the one you want to get rid of, whatever you want to get rid of, put on the bottom, and yards on the top, and then just write how those are equivalent to each other. 1 mile is how many yards? What's that conversion? I forget it myself quite often. That many, right? 1,760. You're going to be given those numbers. You don't have to memorize those numbers. I mean, you probably will memorize them at some point, but... So this tells you that you do what with those numbers? Multiply or divide. If this big number's on the top, I mean, you don't even have to know. You could just go 3.4 times 1760 divided by that if you want. You don't have to write it this way if you don't like this unit analysis. Some people just write 3.4 miles times 1760 yards per mile, right? And then they just know I multiply, right? Or they divide if they know it gets smaller. Okay, you can do that if you want and say 1760 yards per 1 mile. So once you've done that, then you should come up with an answer that makes sense, right? What was it, 3.4? Move this over here. 3.4 times 1760 gives you that many. Okay? 5984 yards. 5984 yards. All right? Again, that unit analysis, if you like that, it says it that way. 5 1/4 feet. 5 1/4, you can write it like that, especially if you have a calculator that'll allow you to enter a fraction like that. You can put it like that, or you could write it as, figure it out on your calculator first what that is equivalent to, or just know that it's 5.25 feet. If you want this to be inches, you got to multiply it by what? Get that out of the way. What do you have to multiply by here? We know we're trying to get rid of feet, and we want to keep inches here, so 12 goes on the top, 1 goes on the bottom. What's up? What's that? Okay, so what do you got here when you do this? Yep. No, yeah? 62.5? Yeah, because 5 times... I mean, if you want... is it 62.5? If you got 12 times 5 1/4, if you... Believe it or not, you could probably do 12. I know you maybe don't think this, but you could do 12 times 5 1/4 in your head if you want to. If you have to do 5 1/4 times 12, I don't think you give yourself enough credit here. Split the 5 1/4 into 2 pieces in your mind, and then it's easy. Because you can just do 12 times, like 5, keep that separate, 5 1/4. Think, what's 5 times 12? 60. And what's 12 times 1/4? What's 1/4 of 12? 3. So it's just going to be 63, right? That's what it is. You can do things like that in your head sometimes just by splitting the number into a whole number and a decimal. 63 inches. Okay? Last couple here. To miles and yards. 12,367 yards times... What do we want to do? We want it to be miles and yards. So first of all, we need it to be a decimal, a miles as a decimal first. Okay? If you want to do unit analysis, you put yards on the bottom and miles on top. 1760, 1 mile. Or, again, I think some of you might relate better to just knowing whether you divide or multiply. So if you realize I want the number to be smaller, you can just write divided by 1760 yards per mile. Okay? If you know that you have to divide, just write it like that. 1760 yards divided by, 12,367 yards divided by 1760 yards per mile. There's lots of different ways to do this, and you got to find a way that's going to work for you. Okay? If you divide that, what do you get? 12,367 divided by 1760. What? I guess that's wrong. I times that. Divide by So we got 7 and just a tiny little bit, right? So I'm going to write that down for 7.0267 or something like that. It's that many miles. If you want it as miles and yards, you need to know how much that leftover piece is. You need to know how much the leftover piece is. It's that fraction of a mile. If you take off the 7, you just have how many, what decimal of a mile it is. If you go backwards now, convert it back, it'll tell you how many there are left over. Right? That leftover piece then, we got that leftover piece by dividing by 1760. If then we times by 1760, you get back to that. There's 47 left over, right? So it's 7 miles, 47 yards. This one is a question that you can try sometime for yourself that's a little more challenging because it's yards, feet, and inches. You got to do that twice. I'll put a little star next to that. I want you to try that sometime if you feel so inclined. We're going to leave this for another time, possibly next day as a little check or a little quiz kind of thing for you. And we're going to try this example. You need a ruler for this. I put a few on the tables there. I don't know if anybody wants another one here. Some extras. I think I only put one on some places there. You want one? Anybody else want one? There you go. Okay, you need a ruler here to do this. All right. This is a photo. Obviously, is like a scale drawing, right? Because it's an enlargement or a reduction of something in reality. Obviously, a polar bear is a lot bigger than this. The scale on this, it says here is the scale on this is 1 to 24. What does that mean when you say the scale of this photo is 1 to 24? It's 1/24th of the real thing. The scale factor is 1/24th. One of any unit on the picture, 1 inch, 1 centimeter, 1 meter, 1 millimeter, 1 unit on the picture equals 24 units in reality. You see scales like this on maps, except map scales are more like this, 1 to 200,000 or something like this. A map scale might be 1 to 200,000, 1 to whatever. All right? It tells you that one unit here is 24 in reality. If you want to calculate the bear's actual height, you can use a proportion to do that. Okay? You can say picture, reality. If you write 1 on the picture is 24 in reality, and then you put the measurements you know here. Okay? You can take a ruler and measure. It says calculate the height of the bear's back. Take your ruler and measure this height right here. Okay, the highest point there. Measure the height in an appropriate unit. I would say since this is imperial measurement, let's use, and especially since it says inches here, whatever unit you want the final answer to be, and use those units. I'm really hoping I set it up so it was a nice number. I think I did. I played around with the photocopier until it worked, but but we want the answer in inches, so we're going to use imperial, right? So that would make sense. I mean, if you did put that, you'd get an answer in centimeters, right? And actually, you could do that and then just convert it after, but it's going to be quicker to do it in imperial. Let's try this. It may well be that the scale of this thing is not actually right. This is actually bigger than it should be. What could a person do here? Let's try. On a computer screen, scale is meaningless because you can display things like this document's displayed at 125%. Scale ends up being sort of meaningless unless you relate it to the size of the see, that's even too small. I'd have to play around with the ruler. It's supposed to be on your sheet. It's 2 inches from there to there, I think, right? Okay. Well, let's let's go with that. We'll assume that it's 2 inches from there to there. And I forgot to set that ruler and figure out what it's supposed to be. If you have 2 inches here, we need to stop talking, you guys, okay? When you're having time to work, you can talk, but not right now. And then put a variable there. We spent a bit of time thinking about how to solve proportions or remembering how to solve proportions. I think the best way is this, especially when the numbers are easier to use like this. What do I have to multiply that by? Or you could look at it this way and say, this is 24 times as much. So what has to happen over here? Multiply by 24, right? This proportional reasoning just says that. If that's 24 times as big, it's 24 times as big. What's x? 48. Okay? 48 inches. Or if we want, what other unit would be appropriate to give there? We could. It says inch here, but what would be another unit that we could give there and it actually works out nicely? Yeah, feet. How many feet is that? Going the wrong way. 4. Multiples of, between now and next day, just before, you can write them down and just think about them right before you go to bed. All your multiples of 12, right? You can just sit there counting. You know, like some people count sheep. You can count multiples of 12. Okay? And you can just see how far you can go, right? 84, 96. I'm only saying that because it would help. It would make life a lot easier for you. Sheep. I don't know where that came from, that whole thing of counting sheep, but okay, we're going to do this one, and then I'll give you some time to work on stuff. What's the length of the bear? State your answer in feet and whole inches. So what you have to do is measure that way this time, maybe. Now, the photo is a bit turned, so it's not going to be perfect, right? If you're ever doing something like this, you know, from a photo, it's an estimate. It's not the actual thing, right? But it gives you a rough idea. So set up a proportion the same way. I'll pause this temporarily. According to this crazy ruler, no, this one has definite problems, but on the scale, I'm not even going to bother. That looks so ridiculous. You got 3 and 5/16. Anybody agree with that? Looks right? Okay. So if you're trying to do this, then 3 and 5/16. You have 1 to 24. 3 and 5/16 x, right? So you're multiplying it by 24. You don't have to write the proportion if you realize you're multiplying it by 24. Essentially, you want to say 3 and 5/16 times 24. Remember that we did stuff like this in the warm-up we did last week where you're multiplying a mixed number times that. You can either use your calculator and put in 3 and 5/16, or change this to an improper fraction. How would you do that? 3 and 5/16, how do you change that to an improper fraction? How many sixteenths is that? 48 plus that 5, right? So 53. If you multiply that, again, on your calculator, you can go 53 times 24 divided by 16. Or you can cancel some things first if you want. If you realize these both divide by 8, you could make that a 3 and that a 2, and then your numbers are a lot smaller, right? And you could say that this is 159 divided by 2. I'm fine. However you want to work through it, divide it on your calculator. Somehow I think you get that this is 79.5. Is that right? Inches. Anybody agree with that? Anybody agree with that? Yes, no, maybe. Whether you did it directly like this, even if you on your calculator, I don't want you to get hung up on the fractions, right? If you want to do it with the calculator, just enter the thing as is here. 3 plus, actually you need brackets around it. If you want to put 3 and 5/16 into a calculator, you can put 3 plus 5 divided by 16. That's 3 and 5/16 times 24. Okay, you get your 79.5.